Hello and welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, April 16th. As always, we're gathered to do our work today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Please be advised this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you have concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. Can I have someone move adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Greenlaw. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we're on item 3, delegation. Today we have a guest from the Squamish Community Housing Society. I will turn it over to Ms. Ellis. Oh, sorry, we need you to turn the, I know, there you go. And then off when you're not speaking and back on. But over to you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Sarah Ellis, and I'm Executive Director of Squamish Community Housing Society, or Housing Squamish. I'm here today with several updates for Council, including an update on our progress towards our strategic plan goals that we presented to Council last fall, a look forward to our focus areas for Q2, and an update on our 2024 operating funding request as part of the District's 2024 spring budget amendment. I'll start with a brief overview about Housing Squamish and our mission. Housing Squamish is an independent, community-based nonprofit society that was born through a partnership between the District of Squamish, local affordable housing providers, community leaders, and the Squamish Nation. Together, we're working to catalyze community-based housing solutions towards our vision for housing as a platform for a diverse, equitable, and resilient community in Squamish. We all know housing affordability is a top priority in our community, and the need for this work is clear, with the district's housing needs report suggesting a need for over 6,800 units in our community by 2031. Recognizing the urgent need for action on housing in our community, the Housing Squamish Board of Directors created a 4-pillar plan to drive the immediate work of our organization, which we presented to Council last fall. We've been hard at work since then, and we're making big moves towards achieving our startup goals, working closely with district staff, our sector partners, and senior government funders. For this first part of the presentation, I'll provide a brief update on work taken in Q1 towards our priority strategic actions, as well as our focus areas for Q2. I didn't know it was going to do that. Our strategic plan focuses on 4 pillars: bringing housing to our community, coordinating and improving housing access and delivery, engaging, educating, and advocating on housing in the community and with our partners, and embodying reconciliation, equity, and good governance in everything we do. Pillar 1, bring housing to our community, is front and center in our mission and priorities. Last fall, we told Council our initial focus areas on this pillar were to create a real estate strategy, to seek senior government funding for new housing development, and to leverage new funding opportunities to protect existing rental in our community. At the end of Q1, we've made real progress on these priorities. We've completed an initial real estate strategy and are preparing to launch in-depth business planning in Q1, Q2, and Q3, which I'll speak to later. We've applied for and received initial pre-development funding for housing on 2 district sites, which altogether could yield up to 150 units over coming years. And we've applied to the province's Rental Protection Fund and are actively pursuing a potential acquisition. On Pillar 2, coordinate and improve affordable housing delivery, we told Council our priorities for 2024 were to launch an online housing access portal for affordable PAH units coming through new development, and start the work of coordinating with existing providers on a single point of access, as well as shared resourcing. We've also made progress toward this goal. We're getting ready to launch an online application form and tenant selection process for PAH units that are coming online this year, and have started work on policies that will inform an eventual waitlist. We're also beginning to work with our partner housing providers on opportunities to support each other and the community at large through shared services. On Pillar 3, engage, educate, and advocate, we told Council last fall that we would be working to build relationships within our community partners, launch a community-based word on housing survey, and start a newsletter to share insights and data on housing. This quarter, we successfully launched our first newsletter in January and plan to release our second later this month. We completed our Word on Housing survey, which received over 600 responses, and completed a final report that's available on our website, or you can use the QR code on this slide. We've also started reaching out and engaging key local and regional stakeholders about our work. On our final pillar, embody reconciliation, equity, and good governance, we told Council last fall that we would prioritize governance, equity, and reconciliation in our policies, work toward financial sustainability, and be a transparent and accountable organization. We've taken some big initial steps toward this work. Most importantly, and what we're most proud of, we've entered into a partnership protocol agreement with the Squamish Housing Society, the Squamish Nation's Housing Society, which is a critical step for our work towards advancing our core value of reconciliation. We're actively working with HEAM on joint opportunities to acquire, develop, and manage housing in the community in service of both our organizations' missions. We're also working on a board governance policy review, which will ensure that our policies and procedures support our values of transparency, accountability, and fiscal responsibility, which I'll speak to more later in the presentation. So as you can see, we're finishing Q1 with several exciting prospects ahead of us. Going into Q2, our focus is on continuing our forward momentum while also building out our internal capacity to manage our existing opportunities and digging into strategic and business planning to shape our coming years of growth. Some of the key directions we'll be pursuing in the next quarter and beyond include expanding our housing portfolio through acquisitions and new development projects that are already underway, building a medium and long-term pipeline of new affordable housing, leveraging the district's CAC policies, as well as the new zoning bylaw to expedite new development, exploring additional services and business lines to support housing delivery, expanding our team by at least 2 staff this year, and continuing to engage and advocate key partners in our community and other levels of government. I'll finish the presentation with an update on the Housing Squamish budget for 2024 as part of the broader 2024 spring budget amendment process. While the vision is for Housing Squamish to achieve financial self-sufficiency, from the early days, the district is committed to funding society operations in its initial years while we scale up our work. The initial strategic framework, work plan, and budget for Housing Squamish was created for Council by Macola Development Services back in 2021, which was set out and encoded in a 3-year contribution agreement with a baseline budget of $225,000 annually. Notably, the work plan and budget that Macola set out for the Society did not contemplate us taking on development projects or housing operations as core activities in our initial years, instead focusing on supporting activities like waitlist management, education and engagement, and research. This initial vision for the Society reflected the context at the time, but since 2021, we've seen housing become a top focus for our senior government partners, with new opportunities opening up that have shifted our strategic focus on housing. Today, we have a housing needs report that clearly shows the depth of need for below-market housing in Squamish, and senior government partners at the table with funds for us to leverage into real impact, with the potential to bring millions of dollars to our community. With this changing context, our strategic objectives have shifted to include priorities for our startup years that were not part of the initial Society work plan, including housing development and acquisition, operation of existing and new units, and in-depth business and real estate planning. Recognizing that this shift in priorities had implications for our resourcing needs, last fall we wrote to Council requesting an additional $300,000 in unrestricted funding for 2024, on top of the existing contribution agreement allocation. The additional funds are requested to scale up our internal capacity to take on current and future projects, including staff resourcing to bring on 2 new roles, a manager of housing operations and manager of society operations, additional operating costs associated with the new hires like office space and supplies, professional support services, including consultants to help with upscaling our internal finance and accounting systems to keep up with the demands of development and operations, as well as legal services, and support for business and strategic planning. We propose that any surplus is put into an internally restricted fund and used exclusively for development and acquisition activities. This slide provides an overview of our updated operating budget, and additional detail is available in a memo that came with your agenda package. Finally, looking at next steps moving forward, we're committed to working toward the ultimate goal of financial self-sufficiency and have initiated strategic and business planning that's focused on achieving our dual mandates of delivering needed housing at scale to meet our community's needs and generating sufficient revenue to support our internal operations. Initial directions from our initial business planning work suggest a minimum target of 200 units under management to generate revenue to support basic operations. As part of our business planning this year, we're going to be developing a revenue model and a pipeline to achieve this target, and also explore additional business lines like waitlist management and income and asset testing services that could generate additional income while also supporting our core work. We truly believe that this work will have a real and meaningful impact on our community, but it will also take time and continued investment from our partners as we continue to build and scale our capacity. For this reason, we anticipate continuing to rely on district funds for operations for at least 2024 to 2026, and we're working with staff on a renewed partnership agreement that will be brought forward to Council this fall as part of the upcoming budget process. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Council, questions for our guests? Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think I speak for everyone around this table when I say we're all very delighted to have you and your skill set leading this initiative. My understanding is that all of our affordable housing initiatives right now are focused on rental, and I was wondering how you felt about branching into ownership, if that's part of a long-term plan, if that conversation's happening.
Yeah, that's a great question and definitely reflects one of the questions I hear a lot in the community as well. There's so much interest in affordable ownership that I think reflects folks' values around the opportunities coming with ownership, potentially some concerns about the security of rental. It's definitely on our minds, especially when we're thinking about medium and longer term planning. The reason we've really focused on rental at this point is that's really where, like, to be frank, it's where the money is. So our existing, most senior government programs are focused exclusively on rental and aren't as supportive of ownership models at this point. But it's certainly something that we're looking to do further down the line.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just, some of the additional funding you're asking for, I can wrap my head around that in the context of a lot of upper government level grants, and we want to capture as many of those for our community. So the extra capacity makes sense. But I'm wondering if you've given much thought to what the picture might look like if priorities change and those governments dry up. Is that sort of, you know, the funding over through 2026 and so on that you've spoken about, is that still necessary or appropriate in a scenario where there's less upper government funding, or is that sort of money that we would really need regardless? That's sort of the base floor, no matter the context.
That's a really good question. And I think there's sort of two pieces to the answer to that. One is the funding request for this year and coming years will be needed, even if there are no additional projects beyond what we're pursuing right now, just to land our existing projects that we're looking at this point, this sort of development, acquisitions, and operations. So regardless of whether there's a shift in senior government priorities, just to land our current projects, I think the capacity will still be important to start delivering. I think there's a bigger piece there, though, around as we do our strategic and business planning, thinking about potential headwinds and tailwinds and how that will factor into a resourcing request. And that's definitely something we'll be looking at.
Other questions? Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think this is a much needed piece of our community. And I'd like to I'm trying to wrap my head around the revenue model moving beyond district funding. So just, can you speak to a little bit, what is the revenue model beyond district funding? I'm sure it's there. I just wanted to have clarity in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about the business model for any housing society, affordable housing society, you generate revenue through rent income, through society fees that are included in operating expenses. And then for an organization like ours that's also undertaking development, there's development fees that you can also assess that come out of the senior government funding as well. So those are two key sources of revenue, the rents and the development fees. Then, like I mentioned in my presentation as well, we're looking at other sources of revenue as well, other social enterprises basically that could support our core mission and also generate revenue. So things like looking to charge developers for income and asset testing or employment testing for PAH units that have those requirements as part of their housing agreements, for example, or shared services that we could coordinate with other housing providers in the community. So those are all general right now, and one of our key tasks as part of that business planning work will be actually landing what that model is and then creating a pipeline. So that's all work that we'll hopefully be able to come back to council with later this fall.
And just so I understand, so when we accept CAC contributions from developers, they typically come either as units donated to Squamish Housing or units held in perpetuity by a separate owner. And so those units that are donated to Squamish Housing, I don't know if donated is the right word there, those are the ones that you would collect rental income from. And the ones that are still owned by developer or somebody else, but are assigned perpetual housing, affordable housing, those are the ones you'd be collecting some like an administrative fee on. Is that correct?
That's the general idea. We're still working that out with individual developers for the units that are just starting to come online, but certainly that's the idea.
And has there been any thought to extending that second bucket? If I could imagine, there are a lot of homeowners in Squamish who rent out their suites or secondary suites. Do you think there's any possibility that a homeowner could put their home, their secondary suite, onto a perpetually affordable housing list, onto the Squamish Community Housing list for some fee, thereby renting their place at an affordable rate? But the benefit that they would get is that Squamish Housing has vetted the applicants and has some accountability with the applicants.
That's an interesting idea. We haven't thought of that, but something that we could definitely consider as part of a bigger work program around that coordinated access piece.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
I'd be so intrigued if there was a market of folks who wanted to put their secondary suites on a list below market rental. But you never know. I like where you're going with that, Councillor Hamilton. Sorry, side note. My question relates a little bit to Councillor Hamilton's question in terms of the perpetually affordable housing units that we're seeing coming online. And this might be a question to Jonas, but in our housing agreements, is there a first right of refusal to be tenanted through the housing society, or is it up to the individual developer how they choose to tenant the units?
Thank you. Through the chair, the older housing agreements don't have that provision because the housing society wasn't in existence back then, so it was very hard for developers to agree to it. The newest housing agreements have that provision, and we're bringing back the housing agreement template. We've been doing some work on it, so we'll be bringing that back to council for review in the very near future, and you'll see those details spelled out in there.
We've also talked a fair bit now that we actually have some units coming online under the perpetual affordable housing policy about reviewing that policy and tweaking it now that we know where it's kind of landing. Is that on staff's work plan?
Through the chair, not at this point. We've been focusing on trying to come up with a good template that is reflective of all the gaps in the perpetually affordable housing policy. So it gives a lot more detail in terms of what the rates should be, what for the type of unit and the type of household. So rather than trying to update the perpetual affordable housing policy, we're trying to come up with something else that's reflective of the principles of it, essentially. But it's not on our work plan at this moment to update it.
Okay, thanks for that. And then I just wanted to clarify in terms of the budget. Later this evening, we'll be looking at the spring budget amendment, and staff are proposing to shift the operating budget for the Squamish Community Housing Society from taxation or general operating to being exclusively from the CMHC grant fund, the Housing Accelerator Fund. And I'm just curious what happens then once the CMHC half funding ends, what the process is, if there's still funding that's needed for the housing society, does that go back into operating? Does that result in a tax increase at that point? And what the rationale is for moving it from the existing line item to the Housing Accelerator Fund?
Through the chair. So the rationale for moving it into the grant funding was twofold. One, our understanding is it's an eligible expense and it kind of fits under the umbrella of affordable housing investments. CMHC is pretty flexible on how we spend the money. And secondly, we want to burden the impact on tax or kind of lessen the burden on taxation because of all the other rising costs that the district has to deal with. I think that the future depends on this, our discussions on the next contribution agreement that we will be working with the society, because the current agreement ends in 2025. So we will be preparing for this next budget cycle and having those discussions.
Okay, that's great. And then just to further clarify, so one of the last budgets that I think council saw was still in the application phase of the Housing Accelerator Fund, and it had $500,000 earmarked as a grant for the Housing Squamish. Was that $500,000 entirely for Housing Squamish, or was a portion of that intended for pre-development funding and the other half, or like a component of it, for Housing Squamish?
Through the chair, it was a general allocation, and it was for both capacity support and pre-development funding for the housing society. We will be providing a little bit more detail in the subsequent budget presentation tonight around what are the more specific expenditures under the grant for that grant funding.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, and some of this is, maybe just part of all that housing policy that's evolving at the provincial level. But, up until now, we've used community amenity contributions, which are voluntary and only an issue during a rezoning. We're now moving, I think, I'm not sure exclusively, but we have the opportunity for amenity contribution charges, which we can collect regardless of whether or not there's a rezoning. But I gather that the amenity contribution charges, the new thing, we cannot capture units and so on like we did with community amenity contributions. And I'm just wondering if you can clarify, or if that's something we know, or is our CACs really the only tool we have to capture units and so on to move to the Affordable Housing Society?
Through the chair, there are some existing tools under the provincial legislation to allow to capture affordable units as a density bonus. So you can essentially pre-zone, have a base zoning density, and then have a higher zoning density, and in that higher density include a portion of affordable units. My understanding is also, and we received a letter recently from the province, that the province is looking to expand or clarify the existing tools. So they are currently very limited, but we know the province has heard from local governments that is a big gap at the moment. We can't zone for it in the same way that we zone for market rental. And yes, the amenity cost charges will not deliver any units. It'll just be a cash in lieu that goes into specific amenity projects, essentially.
So is it fair to say then we're sort of in a period where we may actually have more challenges than in the past few years of capturing affordable units for the housing society as the rules change, and there's a gap that we've asked to be filled, but right now there is really a gap that we didn't face sort of the last couple of years, or is that accurate?
Through the chair, I'm not sure if that's accurate. I don't think we are expecting to see less rezonings in the near future. I think the long-term sort of push from senior levels of government is to pre-zone land. But I think a lot of jurisdictions, including us, will likely be very hesitant to do that without having the tools to secure affordable housing. And the province hasn't mandated municipalities to go ahead and pre-zone land. One thing we do need to do is to align our official community plan with our housing needs assessment. And then if out of that process comes out that we don't have enough zone land, then we will have to pre-zone it. I think at that point, we'll be looking to use all the tools we have. So the outlook in terms of CACs, there's continued to be a policy that's valid even when we have ACCs. And I think our expectation is that it will continue to bring in affordable units.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner, on this point. No, you're okay. Okay. Any other questions for our guests? I mean, go ahead, Councillor French.
I'll move receipt if you want to go that route.
I think we're there. Yep. Councillor Hamilton seconds. Would you like to speak to it?
Thank you. And in speaking in support of the motion to receive, I want to share that I had a concern that was addressed in the presentation. I don't want the Housing Society to rely on district funding beyond the startup years. We've seen where other societies in the past have had grand visions, and 20 years later, they're still relying on government subsidies. Don't think that's going to happen with this organization. And thanks for the presentation. It was enlightening.
Thank you. Other comments? Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Ms. Ellis for coming and providing an update on all the work that's going on at Housing Squamish. I think it's important to continue to be transparent with the community in terms of the amount of effort that's going into not just coordinating access to affordable housing in our community, but actually building homes and acquiring below market rental. So thanks for the update. And I think while I appreciate Councillor French's comments of like one of the core components of the Housing Society when we created it at the District of Squamish was for it to become self-sufficient, I think the reality is that it's difficult to do that. And the organization has started to explore a number of options in terms of how we decrease that amount of reliance over time. And that continues to be the intent of the Housing Society for sure. But I think the reality is that housing is such a core part of our community that we may need to start turning our mind to some level of support for the Housing Society in perpetuity, just given the importance of the work that they are doing. But I think that's a future conversation for longer term budget planning, but appreciate all the work that's going on to make it as robust an organization as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thank you for, really appreciate the presentation. Like my colleague just said, I think it is a good ambition to have to be self-sustaining, but we have also seen the disparity in wealth and access to housing grow so large. It's maybe not unreasonable, and I think it's one thing that we can do as a local government to help add a bit of balance there. And so, we may need to be involved longer than we initially had thought. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think just in my mind, as I'm considering what's going to come to us tonight, it is a significant ask, but the challenge that needs to be addressed is massive. And there's a really unique opportunity right now with all the upper government funding available. And so that does make a strong case for considering this. So I look forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greenlaw.
Yeah, again, I want to just say thank you for all the hard work. Affordable housing is just, it's a topic that comes up basically daily for me in the community. And I watch my friends leave this community because they can't afford to live here anymore. So I'm very glad that you are doing this work. And I do hope, like I'm very fiscally conservative and I do feel strongly about home ownership models. So I do hope that that is on the horizon at some point because it is directly linked with financial solvency, especially for women. So, but I'm very grateful that you're doing this work, and I would like to echo the comments of Councillor Pettengill and Councillor Stoner. I do. I mean, obviously, it would be great if this was not a financial obligation of the district moving forward, but the more paramount importance is housing stability for our community members. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple comments myself. Thank you for the presentation today and for your work. And I think, and also to you and through to the board for, the early work on developing this program, as you highlighted in your presentation, had development being something to be considered, down the road. And I know the board is very motivated and capable. And I'm very happy that we are where we are. We're coming together as a community to essentially, in my assessment, to capitalize on the opportunities as best we can as they present themselves. So I think we're well positioned to do that with you and your organization. So thank you so much. I'm happy to support your work. I think. Going forward, there's lots of future talk here. We often operate in future future states that we'd like to see, and I would like to get to the place where the existence of the housing society isn't dependent on the local government of the day being willing and able to participate. And I see these investments up front now as building the best foundation possible. So that's something that future decisions can really be based around, and the housing society can stand on its own 2 feet as sort of as early as possible. But what the local government of the day decides is the best thing to do from a funding perspective is hopefully that won't your work today sort of will set the stage for that not being so. So, Council, our next item, there's no presentation on the next item. There's no presentation on the next item. It was circulated via email yesterday, and you have it in front of you. Would you like a few minutes? Has anyone had time with the memo in advance of the meeting, or would you like to take some time, a quick recess? Let's just take a quick 5-minute recess, and we'll reconvene at 12:40 by that clock. Okay, thank you. We're back. We're on item 4, which is a request to council to extend an invitation to our sister city, Shimizu, Japan, to attend Truth and Reconciliation Day events in Squamish and funding associated with that. Council, I thank you for considering this. We've put together, worked with staff to put together a bit of a backgrounder, which I think summarizes it where we are. And I think I'll just speak to it briefly and then try to address any questions you may have. When I was in Shimizu with Councillor Greenlaw in November, and it was great to have so many, lots of conversations with folks in our that we interacted with, and it became quite apparent to me that we had lots to learn from each other, and some of that I spoke about in the Councillor Greenlaw and I tried to address in their presentation when we came back. But one of the pieces for me was understanding what the relationship is with our First Nations people broadly in Canada, but then also specifically here. And sister city initiatives really came out of Second World War reconciliation efforts between North America and Japan. And I think that with the complicated history that we have with Japanese internment here and so on, and then layered in with the nation, truth and reconciliation work, I think this really presents a unique opportunity. They requested to come for Squamish Days. They had such a great time when they were here a decade ago, and I really and that's an amazing time of year, which I know that you likely all enjoy, with the parades and pancake breakfasts and putting on our best. But I really think that there's an opportunity here, particularly in the truth part of the Truth and Reconciliation, to build some understanding. And I'm really proud of how our community comes together on that day in a totally different way. And I'd like to be able to share that. We've put together a rough budget. In the early discussions with community groups, there's lots of interest in participating, and some of them have the ability to help with various pieces. So I wanted to put together something that was sort of not dependent on other partners coming, but that if we extended an invitation, we could start specific planning around that. So this is very much the reflective of that. Things like Tourism Squamish says that there's some programs available, and they're very interested in participating, whether that's and whether or not that comes with funding or not, we could explore that when we move further along in this process. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and then there is the recommendations attached. Oh, and also the last bullet point is one we've mentioned before, but I think this relationship and any future ones that are long-term in nature deserve a way of funding that isn't dependent on council contingency, which is the only funding source we really have for this. And the amounts in the grand scheme of all the things that we do over the term of the relationship are very small. But I think that the municipality is the leader in so much as we've signed and committed to the sister city relationship. But the benefits to be fully realized by our other groups, Tourism Squamish, Chamber, and so on, require regular contact and some maintenance for them to grow those as well. And in other communities, some of those groups actually lead sister city initiatives. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. I think a simple way to do it would be to consider some form of annually or every 3 or 5 years or some other occurrence, a little bit goes into a fund somewhere so that we have the ability to maintain the relationship going forward. So that's what the third bullet point aims to get at for a future discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we have staff available as well if needed. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
I will have a question concerning the transportation budget, but maybe I'll introduce, give some preamble. There's mention between meaningful connections between our tourism, economic, education, and sporting groups. I would add environmental. And the reason why I suggest that is that Shimizu has chum salmon, and they are involved in fisheries habitat restoration in that peninsula. And I was in a gathering in Ucluelet where Japanese technology in rehabilitation of salmon streams was implemented, and they have some different techniques and approaches and history of that. So I suggest this, and this is also ties into contact with the Squamish Nation community. There's opportunity to showcase our salmon habitat rehabilitation projects. And here I come back to the transportation budget. I think it might be of interest not only to look at fisheries projects, but also forestry. The only people I know of that are exporting to Japan from Squamish right now are the Squamish Nation. They're exporting logs from Chuckmas Reserve number 11. So I can envision a very interesting tour that would not only take in on another day, not on the same day, a visit up the valley. And so I come back to Mayor Herford, what is envisioned with the transportation budget of $1,500? Because, you know, renting a kind of a party bus type of a scale of vehicle, excuse me, that's what the company is called, but that might be a factor to consider. But at any rate, I do suggest connecting with the environmental groups, in particular in fish habitat. And also, as per your suggestion that you're implying of developing ongoing long-term contacts with other partners in the community so they can help to contribute to the costs of these visits, is that we work on, with the Chamber perhaps, identifying the business sectors that may be of interest and think about them with a long-term view of facilitating contacts.
Thank you. So in this budget, one of the things is in our research for this and looking at the financial contributions made at different visits, it's a mix from, you know, one party pays everything to other party pays everything to some hybrid in the middle. And as you know, our accounting here has evolved over time. I think some of the previous transportation or other pieces were sort of rolled into other operating pieces. So this would be the use of our recreation van and a driver from our staff to do that work, but represented in this budget, not in the normal operations budget of recreation. So that's where that is. So where that van goes, to your point, you know, it's not it's not an off-road vehicle, but it can get to the places. So as I've had some preliminary very informal discussions with the nation and about opportunities to interact with the delegation if we're successful, and now we can advance those and see what that could look like and what that interest where they see the opportunity. So I look forward to engaging with the nation on this if that's something that's supported by council. And thank you for the suggestions. Yeah. Other questions, Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah, thanks. On item 3 of the recommendation that staff be directed to bring forward a more stable and predictable funding mechanism, that's one that's not sitting quite as well with me, because this the sister city relationship really relies on the mayor and the council being invested in this and making an individual choice to engage. Yeah. And I think that if we just presume that future councils and future mayors are going to be as engaged and then just have the money there to just be spent, whether they're engaged or not, is perhaps not the wisest choice. I think it might be more prudent for each council to make a deliberate choice to engage or not engage. And I think the only mechanism we can do that is through council contingency.
That's a fair point. I think the other another way to accomplish essentially the same thing is that if there's a fund to maintain sister city relationships, if or how you use that is up to the council of the day. So it's just there, and it's not something that this has been long-term relationship. And I think that when I think about the types of things that we generally use council contingency for, supporting long-term reoccurring things that have some cost to the municipality isn't necessarily what I see here, although it's within our discretion. So this ask is totally within our discretion to do that. But I think, and even a small amount that over time would be what I was considering. But that could be the discussion we have at that time, and I'm looking for the space for that. I suppose if we wanted to be more complex with it or more detailed, this could be something that gets referred to future strat planning piece. I don't see it being that complex. That's why I made this recommendation, but I'm open to the discussing with the group, and the decision today would be to have that future discussion around what that could or should look like. Go ahead, Councillor Penigo.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple thoughts and a question. For me, this does seem like the sort of thing, well, we've sort of had the sister city in our minds, but the attention to it has been, I guess, spotty maybe, or inconsistent. And so I think for me, it is something where it makes sense to either do it and commit to it or decide to not do it, as sort of the half in, half out we've had over the last decade or so. I do think, in my mind, this is the sort of thing that a council would decide if they wanted to continue in the strategic planning, and then the sort of stable funding would come in or out. Sort of leads to my question. I'm wondering if staff have had a look at some of our trade and investment grants and that sort of thing, and if there's any sense that those grants could or might be able to fund this sort of thing, especially as Councillor Anderson spoke. It seemed like maybe there's some alignment there. I'm just curious.
Through the mayor, we have not looked into grants for sister city visits.
Okay, that's it's just something in terms of trade and investment. It might make sense, and so I'd be curious. I'm okay, I think, with council contingency for this year. I think for me, one of the things that makes this a lot stronger is the reconciliation piece, and I think going forward for me, strong involvement of Squamish Nation would be important, especially because this is Squamish Nation territory that everyone's coming to, and so I think that would make it a lot more powerful, and I think address some of our what we want to do in reconciliation as well too. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I think you touched on this, but can you confirm if the draft budget includes in-kind donation time, like staff time, etc.?
It does it does as fulsomely as we could. Doesn't include coordination time run through mayor's office and so on, but as best we could to capture that. One of the pieces that the bigger pieces here is the interpretation services, and this was sort of initial quote we got from a service. We're looking for other ways to accomplish that. So that's an area that I see that is very important. So I want to make sure that we had accounted for that there, and we're hoping that that can be achieved through some partners or some other means. We had a English teacher accompany us, so maybe there's ways through those other organizations. So I didn't want to advance that conversations too far without this approval from this group, so we could go ahead and sort of look after those details. But I did the very best to capture all the everything in here, and the approval is for the overall number, and some of those buckets might move slightly, but this is the rationale that it was based on.
And sorry, just to clarify, coordination and admin time for this is expected to come out of your staff time budget?
Yeah, that's correct.
And that's in addition to what's on the current budget line items?
Yes.
Okay. And then I just want to confirm, Truth and Reconciliation Day events have happened over the last 2 years, but often by a group of volunteers who come together to put it on in the nation. Have we confirmed that that's something that they intend to do again this year?
That's my understanding, yes. Yep, go ahead, Councillor Penningill.
Yeah, thanks. One clarifying question I forgot. It mentions specific individuals in a delegation, and I'm just wondering, is that sort of a more of an example, or can we leave in some flexibility there? Just
There's, thank you for the question. There's been some dialogue around, and there's eagerness to come for a visit. So we were trying to understand how to put a budget together. So we had to have some discussions around, if you were to get an invitation, who would come, what would that look like? And this is what was provided to us. The invitation would be, wouldn't be as specific to that. That was just what we received in reply as we were having those early conversations. Yeah, Councillor Hamilton.
Are there any, so this is, the visit would be approximately a week or so? Is that kind of?
I think it works out to about 3 days before Reconciliation Day, or the day before Reconciliation Day, and the day after. What that exactly means on hotel nights and transport on either side, but roughly 3-4 days.
And so this is obviously requiring some staff capacity to implement. Are there any things that we are having to offset here because we're putting a staff capacity towards this effort? It's very clear that our staff capacity is very limited. And are there any major offsets that we're going to see because of our staff engaging in this planning?
That's an excellent question. The majority of the coordination would come through my office, and I think it's within the capacity of that specific. When we think about the organization, and it's important to think about the overall organizational capacity of, but we're directing the work of individuals at this point. So I think there's capacity here, and similar to bringing on a contractor, it takes some supervision to coordinate that. Similarly, when we bring on, I think tourism Squamish will be for a chunk of the day, which they'll take in plan. So I don't think the lift says will be as huge, and we've discussed that as well. So I think we'll be okay. I suppose are there any other questions? I find myself in a position where I'm making the recommendation, so I suppose yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to move the first two recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I'll second, or Councillor Greenlaw seconds. Would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, I think that one of the conclusions of visiting and being invited to visit is the reciprocal of that, is inviting Shimizu Town to come and visit Squamish. And I think that it was our choice. It was our choice as our council to draw money from our council contingency in that decision last year. And I think it's appropriate for us to continue that engagement with the first two bullets of the recommendation.
Thank you. And just a point of clarity there, in the initial trip, we did have approved council contingency, and then it ended up fitting inside the travel and conference budget from myself and Councillor Greenlaw. And this amount is very similar to that. I didn't draw that connection earlier. Anyone else speak to this? Councillor Greenlaw?
I'll speak in support of the motion. I think it's important in terms of reciprocity for the experience that they held for us. But also, I really thought it was an invaluable experience going over there and seeing how a different municipality functions in a totally different culture. And it really changed my purview in this position of how you can get things done and how municipalities can operate. So I'm looking forward to that. I wonder if there's any room to request gender parity in the group that comes over, because it is in Japan, there's 10% representation for women. So it might be interesting to encourage some of that. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll have some conversations about that. I have some thoughts on that. I don't know that the specific invitation would speak to that, but I think this is the type of thing that through work and dialogue and deepening that relationship that we can attempt to address. And but I look forward to that conversation. Councillor Anderson, did I see your hand?
I had the pleasure of hosting the group in 2014 over the Squamish Days weekend as kind of a liaison working with the interpreter, and they enjoyed that weekend's programming so much that they requested with Mayor Kirkham to change the itinerary so they could come back again for the Sunday show. However, I think that this September opportunity is an opportunity for us as a council to a better opportunity than early August to engage with the delegation that may be coming, and also for our district apparatus to engage with them. I think it's a good time of year to test and see what we can come up with for programming. And so I think that I'm sure that I and my colleagues would appreciate any future opportunity there may be to take part in the brainstorming regarding a visit itinerary. And I think that there should be good opportunity with local business and organizations towards that objective of having them share the burden in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pennigan.
Yeah, happy to support this. I think for me, like I alluded to earlier, a big appeal is seeing a really tight collaboration between us and Squamish Nation, and hopefully Tourism Squamish and the Chamber as well, on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I think that could be a real big win for from this outside of even the Shimizu delegation.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner and then Greenlaw.
Thank you, through the chair. I will support the two motions on the floor. I think that this is an important piece of the reciprocal nature of a sister city, and I think that it also enables more of our community to engage and learn from and have some shared experiences with the delegation from Shimizu. So I think that this makes good sense following on from your folks' experience last year. To be able to bring some folks over from Shimizu Town. And I really do appreciate the effort to focus and ground this around the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. I think that that makes really good sense in terms of trying to more cohesively share some of the work that we're doing, both in community to advance reconciliation and also air some of the realities of our history. So I appreciate that thoughtfulness.
Thank you. Councillor Greenlaw, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one brief comment. I appreciated what Councillor Anderson was saying about some of the more economic benefits that this sister city relationship could bring, and the learning opportunity. I think that would be a really interesting lens to put on this visit as well.
Yep. Thank you. Any comment on this? No. So with that, I'll call the question. And again, the mover moved the first two bullets. So all in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Pennigan.
Yeah, I'd like to move a slight variation to the third bullet, which is staff be directed to investigate more stable and predictable funding mechanisms and policy to support future city initiatives for consideration as part of the 2025 to 2030 financial planning process.
Councillor, I was going to. I like where you're going. That was my recommendation. Hearing the discussion around the table, I was going to move that this go to a future strat plan update, because for me, as I think about this, it really comes down to like what the potential, like what happens out of this visit, where are we, and then do we see the value in that? So I think, and I was in my making this recommendation here, I was on the fence whether what I wanted to do with that. But hearing the discussion, I think it's totally appropriate to put it there, and then that frees up this planning process. We've already got this visit funded. We'll have a bit of a runway for the next one, so I think that might actually be the best place for it. That's where I am. I don't thoughts.
Yeah, I'm fine. I can rescind my motion, and I just there's two pieces. Like, do we want to do it again, and then what are the options to fund it? And doesn't really matter the order. I think both questions need to be answered to move forward, and so that's fine.
Okay, so I'll move. Oh, Councilor French.
Well, I was going to suggest if you want to go this route, the motion you're contemplating, I would be willing to move.
Okay, well, Councilor French moves that that bullet point 3 be brought to a future strat plan update for consideration, and I will second that. Go ahead.
Thanks. And in moving and supporting the motion, I was really pleased with the outcome of the visit that took place to Japan. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, they love us more than we do. And I think that this gets us a little bit closer to loving Shimizu just as much as they love us. It's totally a two-way relationship, and I want to see it become more of a true two-way relationship, and I think this gets us a little closer to that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Penningill.
Happy to support this, and I just want to take the opportunity to sneak in a comment I forgot. I do like Councilor Greenlaw's suggestion about, and we can think about how we do it, but looking for gender parity in the visitors, and maybe not just for next time, but for somehow as part of this invite. I wouldn't mind pushing that if we can.
Thank you. Any other comments on this motion? I'll just say thank you for the support on the first two, and I think I'm happy with where we landed with this. I think this relationship and relationships like this, only are beneficial when they're maintained. So that's when we can realize the potential, and I look forward to discussing that at a future strat plan update and as part of the debrief of sort of where things were following the visit and so on. So thank you very much for the support. I call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Our next order of business is a motion to close. Can I have a motion to close? Moved by Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor Greenlaw. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So we usually need about 15 minutes to break down the room. So we'll come back at 20 after 2. That works for everybody. So we'll recess and we'll resume in the closed. Thank you.